Hello, it's Sonia here with the Pretty Stitch. Welcome to my channel. If this is your first time here, thank you so much for joining me. I really appreciate it. And today is another Wednesday. It's the Stitch of the Week. And today the Stitch of the Week is going to be another cluster stitch pattern. They're really fun to do, I think, and they create a really nice, interesting fabric. So for this stitch pattern, I am using my eye hook, or 5.5 millimeter, and I am using worsted weight yarn, or number 4, but you can certainly use whatever hook size you have or yarn weight you have. It would work with a variety of yarn and hook sizes. Okay, so my camera can focus. Let's get started. So for this stitch pattern, you are going to need to work a chain of a multiple of 5 plus 3. So what that means is anything times 5, and then you're going to add 3 after that. So I'm going to chain 15. I'm going to chain 15 because 5 times 3 is 15, and then I will add 3 more, and that will be 18. So I'm chaining my 18. Alright, so I have my 18 chains here, and what we're going to do is in our 6th chain from our hook, we're going to work a cluster stitch. So I'm yarning over, and I'm going to count 5 chains, and then in the 6th one, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, here's number 6, that's the one we're going to work in, and you can work in the chain however you wish. So I have my yarn over, I'm inserting my hook in that 6th chain, and I'm going to pull up a loop. So I have 3 loops on our hook, and we're going to work the cluster. So to start this cluster stitch, we're yarning over, and we're going to pull through 2 of those loops, just like we were working a double crochet. But we're going to leave these 2 loops on our hook. We're going to yarn over again, we're going to go right back in that same stitch, pull up a loop. So we have 4 loops, yarn over, pull through 2. So now we have 3 loops on our hook that we're leaving. We're going to yarn over again, work right back in that same stitch, pull up our loop. We have 5 loops, yarn over, pull through 2. Now we have 4. So to complete this cluster stitch, we're going to yarn over and pull through all 4 of those loops. So that is our first cluster stitch right there. And we're going to combine this with some other stitches, and it just creates a really cool looking cluster stitch pattern. Alright, so after that we're going to chain 1, and you are going to skip 2 chains. So 1, 2, and then in the next chain you're going to work a double crochet. So we've worked our double crochet. Now we're going to kind of work a small cable stitch here. We're going to work in, not in this skipped chain, this skip chain, we're going to work in this one. So the one that's closest to the double crochet, we're just going to go right back and work a double crochet right in that stitch. And it's going to look a little bit like an X. And there we go. So now we're going to chain 1, and we're going to skip the next chain here, so right here, and we're going to work another cluster stitch. So right what we did in the beginning. So we're going to go in, pull up a loop. We have our 3 loops, and we yarned over first, so we're going to yarn over, pull through 2, go right back in, insert our hook right back in that same chain. We've got our 4 loops, yarn over, pull through 2, we have 3, we're going to yarn over again, right back in that same chain, yarn over, pull through 2, now we have our 4. So once you have your 4 loops, then you can complete the stitch, and there we go. And you can use these cluster stitches, it kind of creates a little bit of a puff, not a super, some puff stitches really pop out. This one is more a flatter, I guess, type of a cluster stitch. So you can chain 1, and now we're going to skip 2 chains. So 1, 2, in the next one work our double crochet, our cross double crochet, and now we're going to yarn over, and then In the chain closest to the double crochet, you're going to work a double crochet. So we're crossing over there. So we're getting close to the end of this chain. So now to finish that off, we're going to chain 1. So after all of your stitches that you make, you will chain 1. So after this cluster stitch, you're chaining 1. After you're done your little X stitch there, you're chaining 1. So good little rule of thumb. So now we're going to skip 1 chain, and we're going to work our cluster stitch in this chain. So I've yarned over, pulling up my loop, got my 3, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over again, right back in there, pull up a loop, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over. Alright, so we've got our 4 loops, yarn over, pull through all 4, chain 1. So now we're going to finish this row off, and we're going to skip this chain and work a double crochet in the last chain. So our skipped chains here, we skipped 5 chains, consists of partly the double crochet, partly of a double crochet and a chain 1 space here. So we want each ends to kind of match there. So that was our setup row. So now we're going to start row 2. So we're going to chain 4 and turn our work. Alright, so this chain 4 is going to count as a double crochet and a chain 1 space. Alright, so what we're going to do is we are going to work in the second chain 1 space. So here is the first one here. Here is the second one. We're going to skip this cluster stitch too. So you're just going to double crochet right in that chain 1 space. And now we're going to go back and double crochet in this one. And then the cluster stitch from the previous row is below it there. So now we're going to chain 1, because after all of our little groups of stitches, this is like a little group, our cluster stitch here, we're chaining 1. Now we're going to work a cluster in between this X. See, we created this X here with crossing these stitches, and it is like an X stitch. You're going to work a cluster in between there. So I have my 3 loops, 4 loops, and now we're pulling through all 4, chaining 1. So now I'm going to skip this chain 1 and this cluster and double crochet in the next. And then we're going to go back and double crochet in the previous chain 1 space to create our X. And then we chain 1 to finish her off. And now we're going to go right back in there. So as you can see, it's not a very difficult stitch pattern. It just creates like a really cool look, and that's what I love. I love simple stitch patterns that create interesting textures and interesting patterns. So pulling through with that, you don't have to think real hard about. I mean, there's nothing wrong with a super complicated stitch. Sometimes I'm in the mood to do that, but sometimes I just don't want to think that hard. Alright, so I'm going to skip that one, this one, and then we're working this guy. Double crochet, and we'll go back and double crochet in the next. And I think this stitch pattern, you could use it for a variety of things. You could certainly, I think it would make a pretty airy blanket. I think this would be actually a pretty lightweight, sweater if you wanted, or a bathing suit cover up. I mean, there's all different kinds of things that you could use this stitch for. And now we're going to work on top of the chain 3 here and creating a chain 1 space as well. Oops, I don't think I chained 1. After I completed that X, I start yapping and talking, and so we got a chain 1. Now we work on top of that chain 3, and our row 2 is complete. So now we're going to work row 3. Oops. Row 3, we're chaining 4, And we're going to turn our work. So again, this chain 4 counts as a double crochet and a chain 1 space. So now we're going to work a cluster right in between our 2 double crochets here. So there is no chain 1 space, but this is a double crochet right here that I'm pulling on, and this one, the X that we created. So I'm working right in between and working that cluster stitch. And I have my 4 loops. I'm going to pull through all 4 and chain 1. So now we're going to skip this chain 1 space, skip our cluster, and work a double crochet in the next. And we go back and double crochet in the previous chain 1 space, one we initially skipped, and then we chain 1 to finish that portion of the stitch pattern off. So now we're going right back in the middle of our little X and creating the cluster. And yarning over, pulling all through all 4, chain 1. So now we're going to skip this guy here, chain 1, cluster, and double crochet in the next. So it's alternating between the cluster and the X, making our X's here. There we go. And we're almost done row 3. And I need to chain 1. Keep forgetting to do that. And now I'm going to work in the middle of that X, working my cluster stitch right there. And yarning over all 4, chain 1 to finish up this row, and then I'm going to double crochet on top of my chain 3 here, where you can fit your hook in there. Sometimes oops, I did it on top of the chain 4. I crochet a wee bit tightly, and sometimes that's fine, and sometimes it's not so fine. It can make life a little more difficult. Okay, so there we go. That is row 3. So when you're looking at this, whatever stitch you started with, so we started with cluster for row 1, you're going to want to end with a cluster. So for row 2, we start with the X stitch here. You're going to want to end with that. And then row 3, we're back to the cluster, and we're going to end with a cluster. So what you want to do is you want to repeat rows 2 and 3 for this pattern. So the row 1 is just the setup, and then you're going to repeat rows 2 and 3. So I'm going to work a couple more rows, and then I will meet you back. Alright, so I worked a couple more rows of this stitch pattern, repeating rows 2 and 3 for the pattern. So you can see in every other row, so this row we ended on the cluster stitches, and then the next row it's the X stitches, the cluster X, cluster X. Now I ended on a cluster because we started with a cluster on the ends and I wanted to end, and I like symmetry, so that's why I ended on that row. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed this stitch of the week, and I thank you so much for watching.